Okay, get this. Paul the octopus, remember him?
Oh yeah, 2010.
Oh, wow.
Unbelievable.
Back then, this octopus called 8 World Cup matches.
Parade.
Exactly.
8 in a row. It was quite the story.
Exactly. And then you've got stuff like the Maracanazo back in 1950. I mean, people still talk about Brazil's loss to Uruguay like it was maybe more than just a game, like a curse or something.
It had that legendary status, doesn't it? That
Yeah.
lingering feeling.
It really does. So let's dive in because for this deep dive, we're looking at something maybe a bit unexpected. The fascinating intersection of magic, maybe the supernatural, and the upcoming 2026 World Cup.
Right. It sounds like a bit of a strange mix. Elite sports and magic.
Totally. But we've gone through some articles, some research, including this one piece called Will Magic Influence the 2026 World Cup? Discover the Supernatural. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, the material we looked at, it covers quite a range, from like player superstitions and team rituals.
To actual historical moments, even the sort of mystical vibes of the host cities themselves for 2026.
It really connects these seemingly separate worlds, the very rational side of sports and these, well, beliefs.
Yeah, so this isn't your usual tactical breakdown, is it? We're not just talking formations here.
Not at all.
We're exploring that feeling, that belief some people have that maybe something unseen could actually play a part in 2026.
And for you listening, if you're curious about this angle, but want the key stuff distilled quickly.
Right, that's the plan. We're pulling out the main insights from what we've read, hopefully uncovering some surprising facts without getting bogged down in, too much detail.
Okay, so maybe the place to start is why? Why does this connection even exist? I think the psychology is a big part of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, the World Cup is just incredibly high stakes, unpredictable.
Exactly. And in that kind of environment, athletes often grab onto little rituals, superstitions, things that make them feel like they have some control.
Like a mental anchor, maybe? The article we read mentioned how these beliefs can just offer psychological comfort.
Uh-huh. If you think wearing, I don't know, certain socks worked last time.
You're definitely wearing them again.
You are. And soccer, especially with its long history and passionate fan base,
Yeah.
seems like fertile ground for these kinds of beliefs.
Totally. The research highlights how deep these pregame routines can go. For whole teams, for individual players. It's part of their mental conditioning.
It really is. And when a game can turn on a single unpredictable moment, well, it's natural to look for explanations, maybe even narratives that go beyond just skill or luck, maybe. Supernatural ones.
And speaking of narratives, that 1950 Maracanazo you mentioned, wow, that wasn't just a shock result.
No, it became a myth.
Yeah, this story about a potential curse hanging over Brazil after that Uruguay loss. The article really stresses how that one event shaped the whole tournament narrative for years. It's this persistent tale of, well, perceived supernatural influence.
And it shows how these stories really become part of the World Cup's fabric. Then you jump forward to 2010 and you get something totally different, like Paul the Octopus.
Yeah. So bizarre.
Bizarre, but his predictions were weirdly accurate. And that definitely got the whole world talking about, magic in the World Cup again.
It really captured the imagination. And the article makes a good point, these examples, from curses to octopuses.
A strange combination.
Right. They add to this rich tapestry of supernatural mystery around the World Cup. It sets the scene for thinking about these things for 2026.
And what's really interesting is how that history sort of informs what's happening now. The research suggests teams prepping for 2026 are actually using this mix.
A mix of what?
Of like cutting-edge sports science and these more traditional, maybe mystical approaches.
Oh, wow. So it's not strictly one or the other.
Doesn't seem like it. You hear about teams doing everything from, simple prayers before a game to much more elaborate ceremonies. Anything for an edge.
Then individual players too, right?
Yeah.
With their own personal rituals, things that connect to their culture or maybe their faith.
Absolutely. It shows how deep these practices run.
Yeah.
The article even mentioned some top teams hiring shamans or spiritual advisors.
Seriously, shamans.
Yeah, which really highlights how these, ancient traditions are finding a place right alongside modern training methods. It's a real balancing act.
Okay, that's fascinating. Now, shifting gears a bit, the host cities. This part of the article really caught my eye.
How so?
It talks about the cities themselves having their own sort of mystical sides, history, local legends that could maybe even influence the games.
That's an interesting thought. Like the location itself has an energy.
Kind of. Mexico City is a prime example in the article. Strong Aztec roots.
Right. Ancient history there.
And apparently, some local spiritual leaders actually believe the Aztec gods might still, take an interest in matches played on that ground.
Wow. That's kind of mind-blowing.
Isn't it? And it's not just Mexico City. The article mentions other places, like New Orleans with its voodoo history, or Toronto with its real mix of spiritual practices. Potential supernatural hotspots, it called them.
Makes you wonder if teams might even, I don't know, try to tap into that local energy somehow.
Maybe. And then how does this stuff get talked about, the media coverage?
Ah, yeah. The article brought up Telemundo's show, El Pelotazo.
Exactly. It suggests they're pretty likely to weave these mystical angles into their World Cup coverage. It clearly connects with their audience.
It's part of the story, part of the drama.
For sure. And speaking of audiences, the fans. The article really digs into fan rituals.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. Fans everywhere doing their own things, believing they can send energy, influence the game.
This idea of collective belief, right? The research calls these rituals a crucial part of the whole World Cup vibe. It shows different cultural attitudes towards the supernatural.
It's like this massive global act of hoping and willing your team to win.
Totally. And the article suggests this collective will can genuinely motivate players, knowing millions are pulling for you, wearing the colors.
Yeah, that's got to have a psychological boost, right? And the research lists examples wearing specific shirts, singing certain songs, Lucky Charms.
It's not just random stuff. It's about unity, maybe intimidating the other side, or just making fans feel involved, feel comforted.
And social media just pours fuel on that fire, doesn't it? Coordinating chants, sharing superstitions.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so zooming out, let's think about soccer culture globally. The article calls it a melting pot, and mysticism is definitely in the mix, especially at the World Cup.
You really see these regional flavors. Like in
Well-
African football, the research mentions juju, spiritual magic.
Right, sometimes involving spiritual workers trying to influence results, which can get controversial, apparently.
Yeah, there have been disputes.
Yeah.
And then compare that to South America, where you often see this blend of, say, Catholic traditions and indigenous beliefs.
Leading to these really unique pre-game rituals that are just part of their soccer identity.
Exactly. So it's not just quirks, it's deeply cultural. The article sums it up well in Africa. Sometimes juju is seen as directly affecting the score, while in South America, it's more integrated into the whole ritualistic identity. Shows the diversity.
But, okay, let's flip the coin. The article also looks at the science behind what it calls magical thinking in sports, which is interesting. It's not just blind faith.
Apparently not entirely. The research points to cognitive processes. Studies suggest these rituals, these superstitions, can actually help athletes
Oh.
by reducing anxiety, increasing focus, and, better focus can definitely lead to better performance.
And the placebo effect comes into play too, right?
Big time. If you believe something helps, even if it's just a lucky charm, your brain can trigger real physiological benefits. It's the power of belief.
Mind over matter, sort of.
Sort of. And the article mentions how it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, too.
Yeah.
You do your ritual, you feel more confident, maybe you play a bit better.
Which then reinforces your belief in the ritual.
Exactly. It creates this positive feedback loop.
Okay, so thinking about 2026 again, how is all this going to be talked about? In the media, I mean.
Well, the article predicts we'll see plenty of it,
Mm.
especially with soccer growing in the U.S.
Mm.
and the influence of the Latino community, where these themes often resonate strongly.
Yeah, you mentioned Telemundo's El Pelotazo likely leaning into it.
Right. Broadcasters know how to build a narrative, and these mystical elements, these cultural angles, they add spice to your story.
And social media will just run with it, won't it? Any weird coincidence, any moment that looks like magic, it'll blow up.
Instantly. The article does make a fair point, though, about the challenge for journalists. How do you report on these beliefs respectfully without, endorsing them as fact?
That's a tricky line to walk, acknowledging it's part of the culture versus presenting it as, like, genuine supernatural intervention.
A real balancing act.
And what about the players themselves? We touched on rituals, but the article mentions specific famous players with known beliefs.
Oh, yeah. Lots of examples. Simple things like always putting the right boot on first, or more involved stuff like specific prayers at specific times.
Where does that come from? Family? Culture?
Usually a mix, the research suggests. Family traditions, personal experiences, cultural background, and the intense pressure of the World Cup. That can amplify these behaviors. Players are looking for any edge, any comfort.
And the star players can become symbols of their superstitions, can't they? Influencing younger players, maybe.
Definitely. And the media loves those little quirks, adds to the player's persona,
Makes them seem more human, I guess, relatable.
whether you share the belief or not, yeah.
So, looking ahead, predictions for 2026. The article says we're already seeing mystical forecasts pop up.
Seems so. Astrologers looking at planetary alignments, psychics offering predictions.
Trying to figure out who's going to win.
Basically, it taps into that deep human desire to know the future, especially with something as massive as the World Cup.
And the article contrasts this with, all the data analysis and stats-based predictions.
Right, the tension between the mystical and the analytical, it's always there in sports.
And afterwards, we always seem to remember the one psychic who got it right, even if 100 others were wrong.
Exactly. Confirmation bias again. New legends get built around those seemingly spot-on predictions. The World Cup is perfect ground for that.
Now, this might surprise some listeners. The article talks about the business of sports mysticism, calls it a lucrative market.
Yeah, it's interesting how belief gets commercialized.
How so?
Well, the research gives examples. People selling lucky charms, equipment claimed to be blessed, even clothing supposed to give you mystical energy.
Wow. And team merchandise, too.
Oh, yeah. Blessed jerseys, official team talismans, things like that.
Yeah.
Capitalizing on fan belief.
It's a whole little industry. And what about those spiritual advisors you mentioned?
They're becoming more prominent, more professionalized. Teams and athletes hiring them formally. It's less underground, more part of the official support system now.
Wild. Probably see even more of that leading up to 2026.
I'd expect so, yeah.
But, okay, perspective check. There are skeptics. The article makes sure to include their view.
Absolutely. There's a whole community pushing back, favoring rational explanations, data.
Why is their main argument?
Usually that seemingly magical events are just coincidence, or that confirmation bias we talked about, remembering the hits, forgetting the misses.
So they don't buy the supernatural cause, but maybe they accept the psychological part?
Generally, yes. They might acknowledge rituals can help mentally, reduce anxiety like we discussed, but they'd say the reason it works is psychological, not magical.
And the media has a role in showing both sides, right? The believers and the skeptics.
Ideally, yes. It reflects the broader cultural debate about faith and reason. It makes the whole picture more complete.
It definitely adds another layer to the whole World Cup drama.
It does. That interplay is fascinating.
So, pulling it together for 2026, mental prep seems huge. And it's this mix of science and, well, spirituality.
Looks that way. Teams are taking a really comprehensive approach. The research mentions standard sports psychology, visualization, mindfulness, CBT.
Right alongside maybe tapping into those more traditional spiritual practices we talked about.
Exactly. It's about finding what works for that specific team, that specific player. There's no single formula.
Some teams might lean more science, some more spiritual, some try to blend it.
Precisely. And players moving between clubs might even have to adjust their own approach, depending on the team's philosophy. It's complex.
But clearly important given the stakes. Teams are investing in both sides, the scientific support and the spiritual.
They really are.
Okay, so finally, the legacy. The article wraps up by talking about how these supernatural stories just stick around in World Cup history.
They really do. It's often those mystical moments, those strange occurrences that people remember years later, maybe even more than the exact scores. They become defining parts of a tournament's identity.
And because it's the World Cup, these stories travel, right? They become global folklore.
Absolutely. They cross cultures. And as ongoing historians, cultural analysts, they keep digging into these things.
That war between belief and skepticism, as the article put it, it just keeps playing out on this huge stage.
It really does. These narratives, real or imagined, are now just part of the spectacle, part of what makes the World Cup so captivating for so many people.
So let's try and sum up this deep dive. We've seen superstition, mystical beliefs. They're surprisingly common, even at the highest level of sport.
Yeah, from historical moments like Maracanazo or Paul the Octopus to the really diverse cultural rituals we see today from teens and fans.
We've touched on the psychology, why these beliefs offer comfort and focus, and also looked at the science, the placebo effect, that kind of thing.
And we've considered how it all gets discussed, the media angles, the business side, and that constant back and forth between belief and skepticism.
When you put it all together, it really hits home that the World Cup is way more than just football.
Oh, totally. It's this huge cultural event where psychology, tradition, belief, maybe even a touch of the unexplained all crash together.
So here's a final thought for you, listening, as you gear up for 2026. We've talked a lot about the psychological power of belief.
Uh-huh.
So does it actually matter if the magic is technically real, if the belief itself has a tangible effect on performance, on the outcome of the game.
That's a great question to ponder while you're watching. Will you find yourself looking beyond just the skills and tactics,
Hmm.
maybe looking for those little signs, those rituals, those moments that feel like something more?
Exactly. Keep an eye out for those stories, the narratives that bubble up around the games. 2026 is going to be fascinating anyway, but this whole layer of potential magic, well, whether you believe it or not, it definitely adds something intriguing.